Hey, welcome back to the channel. This is Mike Goodicke. You're listening to the Social Network Shaman channel. Today we're going to talk a little bit more about mental health. We explored some of the pitfalls of social networks and what kind of dopamine releases they do and chemical releases into the blood that start to create different types of situations where we are dependent on using something. And these dependencies, they look a lot like the dependencies to other things like drugs, alcohol, cigarettes, etc. So we're going to try to dig a little bit deeper into what exactly this issue is, and why social networks and things that are addictive are something that we need to be careful of, we need to be aware of, and we need to circumvent these things or work around solutions that get us deconnected from the very types of things that create these addictions. And social networks, they're very difficult to disconnect from because of these chemical releases. And in order to understand, okay, well, what does the chemical release mean? We have to dive a little bit more into mental health, and we have to start exploring different connections in the body and how we deal with negativity, how we deal with stress, and what these different types of connections actually mean. So when we start up the discussion, the last few years, they've been pretty tumultuous, so to say the least. I mean, we had the pandemic, we had people that were disconnecting from other family members, we have a whole bunch of different things that are causing unrest, like the political discussions that are happening and social media being used as a platform to push this propaganda, etc. But what we're going to focus on is more of like the mental health aspect, and then something else that's pretty interesting on newer research in the last few years, which is the heart and mind connections and how they directly relate to how we build our reality, these emotions that we exhibit, and then if these emotions are things that we can use the knowledge of research and these case studies into, is there a heart and mind balance? What does that directly look like? And how do we use these things to improve our mental health? So if we're going to talk about mental health, then we need to first have a working definition of what is mental health. So mental health is a pretty broad and complex topic to discuss if you're not trained in these things, and we're not psychologists. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not trying to prove to anyone that I am one. That's not the objective here, but we're going to talk about these things as simplistically as possible. So what mental health basically means is it includes or encompasses our emotion, psychological, and social well-being. Well-being is one of those topics that we hear a lot about in holistic medicine. So what mental health really does is it affects how we think, how we feel, and how we act in our daily lives or in our everyday situations. But it also affects our ability to cope with stress, with building relationships, with making positive decisions in our life, and the foundations of how we make those decisions, what our beliefs are, how we get to those beliefs, etc. So when we take care of mental health topics, it's essential, and they have a very significant impact on our quality of life, which is also another topic that we talk about in holistic medicine. So there are a lot of factors that can contribute to mental health issues, and they can be different various topics. Like they can range from physical to psychological to social to cultural, different types of things that are called stressful life events, like a job loss or an illness or a death of a loved one. These things can lead to mental health issues, but also dependencies, addictions, things like genetics or past trauma, substance abuse, and also dependencies on technology like social networks can also lead to mental health issues. So when we talk about mental health, it's important to understand what are the types of issues that can happen and that we need to take action when these issues happen and they're identified. And one of the most important things about this is when we notice that we have these types of things, that we need to figure out, how do we get help? And there's different ways of doing that. An app can help in a small help group, but it does not in any way stop you or absolve you or eliminate the need to get professional help. So how do we get to the point in mental health and that definition of mental health that we need to seek help? So we do that by recognizing the different types of signs that research tells us about mental health issues that are telling us we need to take action. So some of these common signs that we see in a lot of different people in a lot of different situations are sadness, hopelessness, difficulty concentrating, changes in your appetite or sleeping patterns, agitation, feelings of worthlessness or guilt. And if we experience these types of symptoms, then it's important for us to basically seek help. And it's interesting how seeking help is something that's done differently between men and women. A lot of times, depending on the cultures that you live in and the sex that you are in this regards, whether you're a man or a woman, men and women seek help in different ways. Men tend to shy away from this, and then usually when they come into meetings where their spouse or significant other has brought them in to get some help, then they typically start sentences off like, I don't want to waste your time, or, my girlfriend or my boyfriend or whatever basically told me to come here and made the appointment, so I just thought that I'd come in, but I don't want to waste your time. So they start apologizing. And it's an interesting thing because there's different challenges and different ways that men and women think. They're not positive or negative. They are just different in some ways. But in regards to seeking help for mental health issues, men are much more reluctant to seek that type of help because they associate seeking that help with, for instance, saying, okay, well, I'm not strong enough, or I don't want people to know my weakness, because if they do, then they can use that against me, etc., which is BS to an extent. But that's the way a lot of people, depending on the culture that you come from, may have been brought up. So when we think about that one piece, mental health, what is that? What are the different situations or signs that we're looking for when they mean that we need to start looking for help, and how the differences between men and women actually seek that help? Then we start to figure out, okay, well, where do emotions, where these feelings come from, and are they connected to different parts of the body? So this is when a lot of different research starts to make connections between the heart and the mind. So the connection between the heart and the mind is pretty important because, there's a lot of different sayings about that, you think with your heart. And there is scientific research that indicates there are basically brain cells in the heart. Naturally, not as many as in the brain, but it's pretty interesting because from a scientific level and physiological level, we do have evidence that seems to indicate that there are at least some type of connection in form of the tissues in the heart, which is pretty interesting. So when we think about this further, our thoughts and our feelings, they are connected to each other, and they're also connected to our mental health. And they can be deeply impacted by how we think and feel at any given time and over a longer period of time. So the more we think of certain types of emotions, the more of a physiological difference we observe in the human body. And there's different reasons for this, and there's different research for that. So an example is our mental health tends to suffer when we are constantly having negative thoughts. So similarly, our mental health can be affected if we feel negative emotions like fear or anger. And there's different reasons for this. So when we think about these types of things, fight or flight, over a longer period of time, we also see some research that indicates that this actually changes our physiology. So basically changes our DNA, it changes our chemical makeup, because we start to want to have emotions that we are familiar with. So these are things that start to happen that also get us addicted to feeling a certain way over a longer period of time. But as you feel these emotions, if they're negative or positive, then especially with the negative emotions, that's when you start seeing people start to exhibit different types of diseases or illnesses, so that many different researchers started to explore this connection. What does that actually mean? And started formulating different theses like, do emotions have frequencies? Do emotions have energy? Do emotions basically lead to us creating the reality that we see in front of us? But there's also other connections, like, for instance, okay, well, if something's in our heart, does it also have a link to our mind? So if we feel a certain way, does that also influence the way we think? And the heart and mind, they're connected not only on a physiological sense or a tissue sense, but also the heart and mind are connected in a more spiritual sense. So what I mean by this is that the thoughts that we have and the feelings that we have, they are linked to the beliefs that we have, but also what people refer to as the spiritual self. And they also affect our well-being from a spiritual sense. So for a lot of different people that explore different types of spiritual aspects of mental health, those can be really powerful ways in which we can use to take those things that resonate with us so that we can heal and we can grow. So it ranges from things like a specific type of religious dogma or a specific religious teaching that resonates with you, depending on what religion you come from, or you move away from classical or the mainstream religions and you go to different types of ones, whether it's shamanism or something else, and then you take the things that you believe will benefit you in the right way, that resonate with you the right way. So when we're exploring the benefits of mental health, then there's quite a few of them. So when mental health works in a good way, it helps us to understand, how do we come to conclusions? How do we think? How do we get to certain feelings? What are the behaviors around those feelings and those thoughts? And how can we use that information to identify areas where we have to make a change, or where it's important for us and for our life and for our happiness, our well-being, to make a positive change in those aspects. So mental health also helps us to get an insight into what our spiritual beliefs are, what our spiritual well-being is. So on the one hand, if our spiritual belief systems are lined up in the way that says, well, you're going to go to hell if you do this, and you can't think that way because if you do, then there's no sense in you living because you're sinning or doing stuff like this, then the question then becomes, is that specific type of spiritual belief or thought something that actually helps us or hinders us? Part of that is a philosophical discussion, and I'm not here to say one religion is better than another. I don't think I'm intelligent enough to do that, to have that discussion, and that's not the topic today. But when we're exploring mental health, then part of that algorithm, part of that discussion is about what does our spiritual self looks like, or what does it look like, and how does that help us to connect with what we are calling an inner wisdom or an inner knowing of what is right and what's wrong, or what's the right thing for us. So when we're exploring mental health, we can also use that to build healthy relationships with others, and they also help us to cope with stress and difficult emotions that we have in our life. So when we're looking at the topic of exploring different items of mental health, it also helps us to develop a self-awareness and self-compassion. So to understand that, where are we at this point in time in our life? Do we have compassion for ourselves? Do we love ourselves and accept ourselves for where we are in the journey in our life that we're at this a certain point in time? Now, that is absolutely something that's important to think about when we're going on a journey of healing. When we've been addicted to something and we're trying to break away from that addiction, and associating and collecting the resources that we need to go into a positive direction. And there's different meanings out there. So there's things like, whether we talk about different types of older religions, talking about commanding the first and second attention, how we build the belief systems. There's also others that talk about meditating and being grounded and connected to everything that is out there to the source. And then also having compassion with oneself, with the world around us, and understanding that we have a limited sense of influence on the things that happen around us. That we, for instance, can influence our own emotions, the way we react to the outside world and our environment, which we absolutely can. And that we use these things in order to build resilience and self-confidence that helps us cope with a lot of life's challenges that we are being faced with. So when we talk about that, then, there's things that we then start discussing about healing, or how do we start a journey to healing if we notice that we're going from one direction. For instance, now it's 2023 and we have our New Year's resolutions, and we want to move from where we were last year, and we want to move to a better place this year, whatever that looks like, whatever that definition for you looks like. So that journey of healing and growing in ways that are important, that are positive, they also help us to develop a greater self-understanding, and they also help us to come to terms with the things that happen in our past. So the more we understand about the things that happen in our past, and we start to unravel the emotional luggage and the negativity and that energy associated with those things, and we start to look at them in a way, shape, or form towards a more positive note that we can use to cope better, to be healthier, to have better relationships, to have an understanding where we came from and where we're going in life. These are pretty important things that are part of that journey of healing that all of us are embarked on. All of us are on the same journey. We're just at different points, and we have slightly different strategies to get to where we're all going. And a lot of times you hear the saying, it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. And I think that's more true than it is false. Because once we reach the destination, then what happens after that? Do we evolve? Do we die? Do we go somewhere else? There's so many different questions about that people have questions about and want to have answers to. So when we're on this journey of healing, we also start to become more conscious of what kind of thoughts we have and the actions that are based on those thoughts and the emotions that we have and our physical, psychological, and spiritual state. Once we get to that stage where we start to separate ourselves from that emotional connection or reaction to something, and we become more mindful of what kind of behavior we have, that enables us to not only do an emotional response, but then separate ourselves, even if it's for a few seconds, to understand, well, I'm angry at something or at someone, but if I lash out and if I hit them, is that really going to resolve the issue that I have with this specific situation, this trigger point? And more often than not, it doesn't help. So these things, the way we react and respond to challenging situations starts to evolve and change once we become aware of what our behaviors are. But then also with concepts like the first and second attention, how do we build these belief systems in the first place? How can we change these beliefs so that they serve us in a more positive way and also allow us to be happier in our life? And when we start to practice these self-care habits or healthier habits and routines, they help us go into the right direction. So what are some of the practical tips that are listed more often than not to improve our mental health? So some of the practical steps that are out there in different research start off with, for instance, eating a balanced diet. So that balanced diet is going to be different for everyone. There's certain things like reducing sugar, reducing different types of, not only sugars, but oils or fats, that kind of stuff. If you're allergic to certain things, that you move away from that. There's also certain types of foods that start to create more negative reactions and basically addictions, especially for sugar and stuff like that. That makes sense to revisit if that's indeed the type of food that we consistently want to eat going forward. The second thing is, and there's a lot of research about this too, is about getting regular exercise. Now, regular exercise can mean different things. It doesn't necessarily mean just going to the gym every day, and that's the only thing that you do when you go to the gym for 30 minutes. It's a good start. It helps you. But also having regular exercise could mean that you go for walks outside, whether you have a dog or a cat, or if you have other animals, you're on a farm, going outside, feeding the animals, getting out and, getting your steps in, for instance, walking to places more than driving cars. These are definitely things that can help. But then there are also other areas like practicing mindfulness and meditation. Meditation also helps us in different ways, and there's different research out there that the more you do meditation in whatever form is good for you and resonates with you, and mindfulness, that also changes the body and the way we respond to certain stressors or triggers. So meditation is not one specific form and only that form. Meditation can mean many different things. It can range from you going out for a walk in nature or hiking or climbing up a mountain. It could also mean that you're doing something else, like you're out on a shooting range, or you're hunting, or you're racing cars, or you're on a snowmobile, or you're doing something that gets you out of the stressy part of your life and helps you to just, focus on the task that you're doing that makes you happy, that allows you to not be as over analytical as you tend to be. So other things that are also included, practical tips that different research talks about, is developing healthy sleep habits. So getting enough sleep, setting realistic goals that you can achieve, connecting with other people, pursuing different types of hobbies and interests, and then more importantly, taking time to relax and unwind. These are some of those things. And there's more that we talk about. So on the one hand, there's different types of tips that we have in the Social Network Shaman app that can help you, ranging from doing exercises with your own body weight, meditation, hikes, different types of shamanic healing or whatever is in your modality, yoga, different types of fitness things, but also connecting with people, exploring different types of things like books, online courses, and websites, and different types of online tools that we help you with, especially if you're dealing with negative and toxic people in social networks. So there's definitely also different ways that you can connect to others that are on the healing journey as well. And one of those is also through the app. But there's also other places like self-help groups. There's friends, there's family, there's mental health professionals that help. There are online support groups, for instance, through shamanic. The Social Network Shaman also has different types of online groups that help you as well. So you can connect basically with different people that are going through similar experiences, find out what they're doing that helps. And then there's also other things like reaching out to whatever spiritual community that you're in, what resonates with you, what spiritual practices are they using that provide ways to connect with that inner sense of wisdom that you have, or with a higher power. So for some people, that's doing prayers. For other people, it's doing yoga. For other people, it's doing meditation. For others, it's doing Tai Chi or Qigong, different types of relaxation moves that you can do that get your body going. So you can do the exercise, you can do the meditation in one. There's different ways that we can do that. So if we're looking at mental health tips for staying positive, some of the things that we look at is, for instance, focus on the present moment. Instead of constantly thinking about the past, focus on now, the moment that you're in, on your state of mind. Also practice gratitude, being thankful for the stuff that we have. Even if it's a little bit, it's always a great positive way to start off with being thankful for what we have, even if it's for just something that may seem very small and insignificant for others, but focusing on being grateful or practicing gratitude every day. starting to set realistic goals, cutting back and realizing, okay, we don't have to build a building every day. Set more realistic goals that are manageable, that don't immediately put us into stress when we wake up and that we can't achieve them. Connecting with other people, taking time to relax and unwind throughout the day. Also pursuing the hobbies and interests, spending time in nature, practicing self-care. Also using, for instance, the Social Network Shaman app for that includes more tips on improving your mental health. And there's a lot of different other things that we can use in that regards that can help us. So that's one part. The other part is, what about the heart and mind connection? And does that affect our mental health? And if it does, how exactly does that do that? So research tends to show us that having a healthy mind and heart connection is critical to maintaining well-being, as well as being able to help others, not only ourselves. So how does the heart-mind connection affect mental health? So there are different ways that your mind and heart connection can affect your mental health. So, and when we understand these things, it helps us to improve the mental health of us and others. So there's different. One of the first or the most significant ways that the mind-heart connection affects mental health is how we understand ourselves and others. So if we understand ourselves and others as a mind and heart, we see them as separate or different entities rather than just a part of who we are. Once we do that, we become less attached to how we look and are seen by others, as we focus more on what's important for us. So we're not focused as much on the outside, but we're focusing more on the inside. So mind and heart connected. We're not attached to how we're looked and seen by others outside, but we first focus on the inside. When we start to do this, we become less attached to how we are looked and seen by others, because of that internal focus on us. What this does is it leads to better relationships, a more inclusive world. Another way that the mind-heart connection also affects mental health is the way we understand our emotions. So when we understand emotions as just feelings or just thoughts, it becomes much more easier for us to disconnect from them. And this can lead to feelings of isolation and a general lack of empathy for those around us. So when we try to focus on the fact that the mind-heart connection affects our mental health, it's trying to find the balance between what is the inner messages that we're telling ourselves, the inner speak that we have, what is the outer speak that's going on, that we first concentrate on understanding what our emotions, our thoughts are, and how we get to those conclusions, and then separating ourselves from constantly being judged by people externally. So there's a few other things. So there's also physical health, there's emotional intelligence, and there's also connection and stress. So the mind-heart connection and physical health. So when we understand the mind-heart connection in this sense, it also can help us to manage stress levels and be more resilient to life's up and downs. They happen. They're part of life. When we start to focus on these things, that mind and heart connection, they influence each other and they influence the decisions that we make, and also how we confront or how we deal with situations that are thrown at us in our life from a physical sense. So when we understand that mind and heart connection, that helps us to manage that stress. It helps us to be more resilient to life's ups and downs. And this also helps our physical health, as well as the physical health of others that are around us. So the mind-heart connection and emotional intelligence, or EQ. Emotional intelligence recognizes and manages our emotions. It's one of those skills that are both mental and physical health, or important for mental and physical health. And there's research out there that shows that developing emotional intelligence can be as helpful for mental health as physical health. It's also helpful when we're looking at that mind-heart connection, as this can help us understand what that mind-heart connection is. So emotional intelligence, what are other people feeling? What are we feeling? Why are we feeling that? How do we connect through compassion on those types of emotions with other people? That accept that we're on a journey and that they're on a different journey, but we're all on the same journey, but we're at different stages of that journey. So if someone's having a bad day, understanding that, when we're having a bad day, that other people can understand that and not immediately start to judge us based on something specific. So a healthy mind and heart connection also helps us to understand when we're under too much stress. So when we understand it and we can manage it, then that can be a resource for achieving an extraordinary life experience. So we're not caught up with a lot of the things that stress us out. We're noticing when stress is starting to build up. We develop different types of means to cope with that stress, like meditation, like Tai Chi, like other different types of things, walking outside in nature, hiking. We start to develop ways that we can stop that stress. And when we stop the stress, that's important because it damages the heart in different ways, chronic stress does, but it also leads to a lot of other mental health issues. And it can also turn good relationships into toxic relationships. So managing stress is an important skill that all of us need to take a look at, and also to get into contact with how we can manage what those stress levels are. So when we talk about stress, for instance, stress is basically the body's way of preparing us to deal with threats to our well-being. So when that stress becomes chronic, then it has adverse effects to our physical and our mental health over a longer period of time. Chronic stress, for instance, is harmful because it can increase the concentration of what are called catecholamines that are released during stressful situations. So catecholamines, they make you feel more alert, more focused, but on the other hand, they also can increase the risk of heart attacks and strokes. So when we're under that chronic stress and that releases these harmful different types of catecholamines, then by managing that stress, we start to manage the releasing of these different types of hormones, different types of chemicals into the blood, and that helps us in a very physical sense. So over time, when there is an increase in these catecholamines, they can cause physical and mental health problems. So stress also causes changes in the brain, and they also affect our behavior and our emotions. So they increase, for instance, blood pressure and heart rate. They make us feel anxious or anxious about feeling anxious. And when these components of stress affect our mental health, finding ways to relieve that stress or that pressure is important to our health and to our sanity and to our happiness. So when we have a lack of social support systems and we have a low self-esteem, those things cause or exacerbate issues with mental health problems. So if we don't feel, for instance, comfortable in our own skin, then we're more likely to develop a serious health problems like heart disease, diabetes, and certain types of cancers. This is one of the portions where when we talk about why social network addiction or internet service addiction, as it's officially called, is very, very important to understand. So we're not only talking about negative emotions, we're also talking about chronic stress. So the more that we tend to use social networks over time, the higher these different levels of chemicals are getting in our blood, the higher stress and more chronic stress becomes, which changes our physiology and our connection between our mind and our hearts. and they lead to heart attacks and different types of cardiovascular diseases, cancers, etc., and high blood rate. So when that stress also increases our heart rate and our blood pressure, it decreases the levels of good cholesterol, because that good cholesterol protects our arteries from bad cholesterol. So there's also other things in the mind and heart connection, specifically with stress, cholesterols, how we work with those, that are also important for us to understand. So stress changes the brain. It causes us to lose our sense of self-worth. It makes us feel isolated from others, and it then starts to produce experiences of low self-esteem. So once that happens, the blood pressure starts to go up, heart diseases and strokes become much more likely, and we become much more likely to have high blood pressure, a higher risk of heart disease and or stroke. But when we manage that stress, when we can decrease that, then that stress that we're getting rid of, that can help us to lower the risk of high blood pressure. Blood pressure goes down. It decreases the risk of us suffering a stroke or having other heart disease or cardiovascular diseases, naturally also based on the different types of foods that we're eating. So are there different kinds of ways that, besides that, where the mind and body are connected? And the answer is yes. So there's other aspects of the mind and body that are interconnected. So what that means is one connection or one part, the mind or the heart, influences the body in different ways. So one of the ways that this impacts us is through our mood and how physically fit we are, or how strong our immune systems are. And the more negative emotions that we have, the more we start to have issues with our moods and being physically fit, because then we don't feel like going to the gym, or we don't feel like going for a walk, or we don't get our steps in, or whatever that thing is that holds us back from doing something. And we talked about some of the ways for improving well-being, and we talked about the different factors like exercising, like hiking, like also focusing on self-compassion, on accepting emotions, and not getting attached to the past and stuff like that. And we talk about this in more detail in the Social Network Shaman. So I just wanted to stop that talk for today. I hope this was useful. Let me know what you think. Let me know specifically about some of the topics that we talked about today, if that makes sense. And I look forward to seeing and talking to you next week.